365 Sports, the NFL Combine wrapped up, over 300 or so players. Eric Galko, OptimumScouting.com, right in the middle of it. This is his Easter, Christmas, all of the above. And he joins us on 365 Sports. Eric, thank you very much. Was there any particular theme or tone after it was over that kind of is something you thought you saw, not just certain 40s like Xavier Worthy, et cetera? Anything in particular that stood out?
You know, I'm there obviously representing as the executive director of the East West Shrine Bowl and talking to teams about both Shrine Bowl guys as well as just overall is the offensive lineman. This is receiver. It's another great year at receiver. It's been that way, it feels like, for 3 or 4 years in a row now. But offensive line is a spot that I think teams are pleasantly surprised and excited to figure out who goes where. It's very fun to rank offensive linemen when teams need one, when there's a lot of good ones, a lot of really athletic ones versus the years that there's not that many guys. So teams trying to figure out how to stack those first 5 or 6 guys. And then they're also saying, hey, the 15th best offensive lineman might have been the 6th best guy last year. And how late can we get that guy? So I think teams are very excited to kind of dive in post-combine and say, look at all these great athletes, these great talented offensive line, tackle, guard, and center, and say, hey, how can we get this guy this early? How can we get this guy later on in the draft? And I think this will be an embarrassment rich to teams who need offensive linemen.
Eric, have you seen a little bit of a shift over in the way that, teams, the personnel that they send to the combine? A lot of teams just send scouts and the coach and GM and owner or the stay back and do things. But the East-West Shrine game, the Senior Bowl, games like that are maybe more where the coaches can get kind of down in the mud and figure out who they like a little bit more?
Yeah, I think coming to All-Star games has always been a little more welcoming, I think, for coaches and GMs. And it's a little more football-based versus, hey, if I like this offensive lineman, seeing him even in a pass rep drill or a one-on-one versus seeing him run a 40, run a 10-yard split or doing some of the offensive line drills. It's a little more conducive to being successful to evaluate guys at an all-star game, plus the access is there. And I think the NFL Combine, with people going a bit too one direction, people saying, oh, it's not worth it. Still valuable. I was there. Every GM's watching closely too. But I think we'll see teams kind of go back to watching the Combine and being there in person once they kind of, I think, update some of the drills and how to do things as well too. But still extremely valuable for NFL GMs and coaches to be there to see these guys, because for a lot of head coaches, they're just starting their college from evaluation after getting through free agency and the regular season.
Eric, it was a big week. A lot of Longhorns there in Indianapolis, but Xavier Worthy with that 40 time, one of the big headlines. Everybody knew he was fast. Anybody who watched Xavier Worthy knew that the speed was his greatest weapon. But what does that mean to see a time like that for teams? And how is Xavier Worthy just viewed before and now post-combine in terms of what is a crowded group of talented wide receivers?
Yeah, I think he was already in that kind of first round discussion before this. And I think for Worthy, it's less about how fast he was. I think NFL teams that evaluate him correctly knew he was one of, if not the fastest players in his entire draft class, and certainly one of the fastest receivers in the draft. But what that number really does, it just kind of solidifies his uniqueness, right? Guys that are unique, not only special, we use all these different words, right? But like when a guy is unique, hey, I've maybe never seen that guy before, or seen only 1 or 2 times in my whole career as a scout or a head coach. Those guys get drafted early, for better or worse sometimes. Sometimes a unique guy doesn't work out in the NFL. But when a guy is that unique, that rare, it's hard to replicate. And I think a guy like Xavier Worthy, man, he's a dream fit for the Kansas City Chiefs to be the next Tyreek Hill. But I think a lot of NFL teams say, you know what? Even if he's just our wide receiver 2, that speed, just have him run go balls and play half field, you'll win a lot of games in the NFL. So I think his uniqueness now solidifies him not only as a first-round pick, but I think a guy a lot of teams would say, man, I'd love to have that guy in our offense and just see what happens.
So I saw your note about Garrett Greenfield of South Dakota State. Is that right?
Yep.
What about him? I saw you mention him a couple of different times. There's always the guys that are FCS or others that jump out the page, and obviously South Dakota State's won a couple of national titles, so he's pretty good.
Yeah, they have 2 offensive linemen this year that'll both likely be top 100 draft picks on the offensive line. Garrett Greenfield broke the vertical jump record for offensive linemen at north of 310, 315 pounds, 38.5-inch vert. Out-jumped probably half the receivers there, most of the O-line, D-line, linebackers as well, too. And he's got NFL teams are really excited about. Had a great week at the Shrine Bowl as well. And then his teammate, Mason McCormick, per the relative athletic score, he is the 10th most athletic guard of all time in the NFL Combine. So both of those 2 guys were at South Dakota State last year, won multiple national championships, had great weeks at the Shrine Bowl down in Frisco, and I think showing NFL teams how athletic they are, and not just these small school shucks guys. They're really athletically talented to be NFL players tomorrow.
Eric, how do you feel about the running backs in this year's draft? You guys had Isaac Guerendo at the Shrine Bowl, and he was, in a timeshare situation with Jawar Jordan, but a super athlete. He's kind of moved up after his combine workout, but this is kind of a weird position to peg because really there weren't, of the running backs in this draft, there weren't a whole heck of a lot of them there in Indianapolis.
Yeah, I think number one, a guy we had at the Shrine Bowl who wasn't healthy was Jonathan Brooks. And I still think he'll be the first one taken when it's all said and done. He's coming back from injury and may not be healthy till during training camp. But if he didn't get hurt, he might have been in the mix to be a top 10, top 15 pick. He's that talented, different type of player than Bijan Robinson, but a really immensely talented guy. And I think close to the draft, you'll start hearing reports how he's on track. He'll be good to go for training camp. And when that happens, I think somewhere in the early second round, he's not going to be too far. One of the first round running back this year, but Trey Benson's the other guy. I think a lot of NFL teams are pretty bullish on, and see a guy that could be Zach Charbonnet went mid to late second round. I think it was last year or 2 years ago. And I think NFL teams see Trey Benson, maybe a little more athletic version of him, of a guy that, hey, he'll be able to carry the ball 20, 25 times by some point during his rookie year and be a franchise guy for a while too. So I think those are the two guys in contention for the first running back taken. And it's not the deepest of positions this year, which will be interesting to see how teams say, hey, you know what, maybe only two or three guys that could be starters, but there's a lot of guys like Guerendo or, some of the Dylan Lobby in New Hampshire might be more of a specialist guy. So I think this draft is much more loaded with running backs who can do one or two things really well, but only guys like Benson and Brooks who can do everything pretty well.
Eric, a couple of questions about the quarterbacks. How many quarterbacks, in your opinion, are true first-round talents?
Yeah, I think it's 4. I think it depends on what your scheme is, but Caleb and Drake will go 1-2, I'd imagine. I'd be pretty shocked if they don't go 1-2. And then Jaden Daniels and J.J. McCarthy. Me personally, I'd probably, scheme agnostic. I'd probably rather Jaden Daniels for a lot of reasons. But J.J. McCarthy is I've told teams, I think he's a more athletic version of a young Pete Kirk Cousins, right? Where it can win you a lot of games and has made a lot of money in his NFL career. And I think we're people too quick to say J.J. McCarthy's not good enough to be in that tier. But those 4 seem like the guys. And the question that I've talked to a lot of teams about is, okay, if you don't think a guy's one of those 4, is it worth taking a quarterback in the second or third round? Or is it worth just saying, hey, those guys are not top 100 picks? So there's a real possibility we see 4 quarterbacks in the top 5 or 6 picks, and then no more until maybe late in round 3.
Eric, I was curious your thoughts on the Big 12's move to have a combined combine over a couple of day period. Interesting, certainly is one word for it, but from your point of view as a pro scout and knowing, for example, Baylor this year has one guy really that is a draftable type of a player, so not necessarily are a lot of scouts going to make their way to Waco. So I guess from that standpoint, you get everybody in one area. What are the positives and negatives, or just your overall opinion on that move by the Big 12?
Yeah, I love it. I think there's some kind of conflicts of it in the industry, and there's certainly some of the cons are, hey, I can't go on campus and meet with certain coaches. Certainly the college programs, that's one area they'll miss, is not having some GMs and head coaches on their campus to see their facilities. So those are some of the obvious, I think, cons. The pros are that, hey, there's going to be some first-round picks there, no matter if your team that year, Baylor or whoever else, has an up year or a down year. And I think every player that's at the Big 12 Pro Day will get the benefit of having likely 32 GMs, right? 32 head coaches, or a lot of those coaches that go to all-star games and combine and pros will be there at that event because you can see so many guys across a 2 or 3 day period. Every year, one of the worst parts for teams, especially scouts and directors of college scouting, is I've got to miss certain pro days because they're going to overlap with others. And if you're a director of college scouting and you can say, hey, I can go see all the Big 12 teams, or I can miss another pro day, I'm always going to go there. So I think people will realize, hey, in the end, we got probably more directors of college scouting and DPPs and general managers to come to the Big 12 Pro Day than any one Big 12 school may have ever had because of scheduling. So I think it's great. I think it's the future. I think more conferences will look to replicate this in the future as well, too. And the Big 12 is ahead of the curve. And, hey, when you have the Star in Frisco where the Shrine Bowl was played to be as your event, it's hard to beat that as a location to have NFL teams go to.
I would think it would save some mileage on those who fly around the country with all of them in one big melting pot. What quarterback, in your opinion, has it drives maybe a scout crazy, that at times dripping with talent and yet at times doesn't seem to get it?
There's some guys on day 2 or day 3 of the draft that I think are really intriguing for teams. But I'll take one of the guys at the top that I think scouts, and especially as these scouts go back to their meetings with head coaches and GMs, and that's J.J. McCarthy. And the question one team brought to me is saying, hey, I think J.J. McCarthy is really good. Would I trade up in the draft for him? And I think sometimes we lose fact of like, hey, taking a guy in the top 5 and trading up into the top 5 are kind of different things, right? If you're saying I like J.J. McCarthy, do I like him 2 firsts and 2 seconds worth? Because that's a different discussion altogether. But at the same time, if you need a franchise quarterback, is that the guy? And I think teams, scouting-wise, across the board, really like J.J. McCarthy. There's not many teams that don't think he's in that top tier of quarterback, and some teams think he's the second best quarterback in the draft. Some teams say, hey, I take him over all these guys from safeness. So there's some really love for J.J. McCarthy, but he's probably not going to go 1 or 2, and it looks like the 3rd, 4th, 5th pick will likely be at least 2 quarterbacks. So the question is going to be, hey, if I trade up for J.J. McCarthy, is that going to be worth it? And I think it's a question NFL teams are asking right now, and I think people don't realize that it's easy to say, oh, the Vikings will go up there or the Broncos will go up there too. Okay, that's great, but are they going to give up all the picks to go up there and get that guy? So we've seen what happens with Trey Lance and other teams that trade up for quarterbacks, and I think that's the question a lot of NFL teams who need a quarterback are going to ask themselves in the build-up to the draft.
Eric, the Cowboys pick at 24. They have needs at running back, wide receiver. Offensive line is obviously pretty big now with Tyron Smith likely walking when free agency starts. At 24, what do you think the best move for them is?
Yeah, I think they're going to get a really good offensive lineman. And I think that's one of the best things they can probably look for, just because they might get the 5th or 6th best offensive tackle at that point, but that player a year ago may have been the best or the 2nd best offensive lineman, right? A guy like Tyler Guyton of Oklahoma or Amarius Mims of Georgia. Again, I think a year ago, those guys might have been top 10, top 12 picks for sure, and they're going to be there at 24 because there's so much talent here. So I think if you're a Cowboys fan saying, hey, who can we get in the first round? Like, you're going to get an offensive tackle that most years might be a top 10 pick. Even if he is 5th or 6th on your board, a guy like Guyton or Mims or a lot of these guys that could end up being there, I think you just sit back, take the best one that falls to you that you believe fits your scheme, and be really, really happy to keep that offensive line of strength for Dallas.
Eric, there's a question in the chat room. Somebody wanted me to bring up Quantez Stiggers.
Yeah.
You know that story because he was at the bowl game.
Yep.
What about his father passed away? He went kind of in a funk, as you could imagine. He was in a 1-car accident. Can you tell us the story about Quantez Stiggers?
Yeah, to make it quick, he was going to college in 2020. Of course, COVID happened, so that college season kind of gets canceled. And as you kind of hinted to, and people can learn more online, wasn't able to play college football in 2021. And his mom signed him up for the fan-controlled football league, an indoor football league in 2022. Goes out there, plays professional football. That kind of extinguishes his ability to play college football. Plays professional football in the Arena League, has a tryout situation, ends up having like 5 interceptions in 7 games. The CFL team, the Toronto Argonauts, say, hey, we'll give this kid a chance in rookie minicamp. Comes in there, goes from the last guy in the roster to CFL Rookie of the Year. And then every NFL team was saying, hey, we have to sign this guy in this kind of CFL window that happens. And the NFL league office stepped in and said, hey, you guys can't sign him. He's never been through an NFL draft. That's why a guy that's playing in the Toronto Argonauts in the CFL just a year ago is draft eligible, because he's never gone through a draft at any point in his NFL or college career. So he came to the Shrine Bowl and showed NFL teams that, hey, being a pro for a year really shaped who he is as a person. He's incredibly mature. He was probably our most impressive cornerback all week down there, and he's going to go from being a Arena League player 2 years ago to being a 4th, 5th round draft pick in the NFL draft this year. Pretty incredible story.
What a great story. Thank you. I'm glad Sir Blah, Blah, Blah asked me to ask you about that story. Eric, as always, thank you very much. So you were at the Combine. You gathered all that information. What's next for you? Obviously, Craig brought up the pro days, and some of them are different this year. What is next? What's your schedule like?
Yeah, a lot of pro days coming up. We'll be working with NFL teams to make sure they know about not only our Shrine Bowl guys, but whoever can help NFL teams this process. I'll be at the Big 12 Pro Day at the Star for 3 or 4 days down there to cheer on our guys and help that process a little bit as well too. And then we're on to draft day in April. So it's easy at the Combine, but things are not done yet until April 25th.
Well, we'll see you at the Big 12 Combine.
All right.
We should be there for sure on Thursday broadcasting, although Friday's Paul and off day or whatever. So hope to see you then. Thank you very much, Eric. It's always great to have you on the show when it comes to the NFL draft. Appreciate your time. Eric Galko, Optimum Scouting Analyst, and also a part of the East-West Shrine Game as well. When we come back later in the fourth